Hello and welcome to KnightHunter Books. Today we are here with our November wrap-up. I surprisingly have had quite a good reading month. My barometer for this is that I've read more than you.
Yeah, most unusual, but does happen.
Apparently.
And as usual, going in order of least enjoyed to most, starting with Night's Dawn by KnightHunter. One of the few books that have both our surnames on the cover.
Yes, that is a really good reason to read the book.
Alas, the inside of the book is not quite as good. It's very much of its time, written in the late 90s. This is pretty episodic, following an amnesiac protagonist who gets dumped into a situation seemingly in a world parallel to the one he fell asleep in, or possibly a long time after he fell asleep. It's not entirely made clear, though I assume that's going to be part of the longer arc trilogy. The female characters are pretty shallow plot devices.
Not a fan.
No, not really.
This one has an interesting history in our household because I read it back in, I don't know, when I was a teenager, and I loved it. I thought it was amazing. That might have something to do with the fact that it was one of the first fantasy books I'd ever read. So, if you haven't read fantasy before, it's not terrible, but the more your expectations go up, the more this doesn't do so well, and I reread it recently, and yeah, also bounced off it. And frankly, if you've got someone who's new to fantasy, there are probably better books to recommend them. My first one is a bit of an odd one. It's non-fiction travel log, written over 100 years ago. Written by Mary Kingsley about her travels in the Congo and the Cameroons. It's part of Penguin's Great Journeys collection, which means it's not really a real book in that it's more snippets of her other books. But I don't think I'd have been able to read a full book of this anyway, so it worked for me that it was about 100 pages. This is a really difficult one to rate, in that it's kind of what you'd expect, in that it is a very colonial view of Africa. Her descriptions of the locals are cringeworthy. They're very kind of single-faceted, kind of seen as childlike. But on the other hand, this may be my naivety, but I wasn't aware there were female explorers travelling alone in Africa over 100 years ago. And it was quite amazing to hear her, climbing these tropical mountains in skirts. So this did surprise me. I frankly expected to DNF it. This is one of the books that's been on my shelves forever, so this was kind of I just need to try it and then I can get rid of it. But I did finish it because of that and the kind of witty sense of humour that she has. On the other hand, when it wasn't being witty, it was being quite dry. So, I don't know, probably a 2 stars or something overall. It wasn't without merit.
From the few bits you read out, it feels like it could have even been the inspiration for the Dragon Naturalist series.
Marie Brennan.
That
Yes.
has a similar tone to it.
Her voice is very proper and well-to-do Englishwoman, which almost feels unreal, but people did speak like that. That's why it's now a stereotype.
Or at least wrote like that.
True.
Continuing my run through Justina Robson's Quantum Gravity series with Selling Out. If I'm honest, I'm not entirely sure how I'm feeling about this series in general. I'm about half the way through the next one and I've stalled a bit. I think it's interesting in that it's a complete genre mashup. You've got necromancers, elves, advanced AI, demons, intra-agency coups. It looks like it should have a thriller type, very fast plot. And they don't at all. They are very much books about the protagonist and her mental state and how she comes to terms with various things that have explosions in. Maybe I'm struggling with them a bit, not because I don't necessarily like that sort of fiction, which I do, but just through sort of jarring expectations. In this one, Lila Black, the protagonist, makes her way through hell, which is not in fact where the demons live. That's a perfectly pleasant place if you can avoid all the jewels. Hell is a state of seeing the world other than how it is, which leaves you prey to mental manipulation. Her journey doesn't have a particularly satisfying conclusion, which probably didn't give me the best springboard into the next volume.
Getting on to the better ones now. My next book is Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys.
But less cheerful.
Well, yeah, so this book is another one I've had on my bookshelves for a really long time. I'm pleased that I read it without just getting rid of it. It's a YA following a teenager from Lithuania in the Second World War and beyond, when her family are picked up, deported from their country and held as prisoners of war in Siberia. It's heavy reading, but it's a part of the war. So I've read quite a few books set around World War II, but this is quite a different take in that I knew nothing about the Baltic states in World War II, or really about Siberian prisoner of war camps, which are very cold and not very pleasant. So it was very interesting, but I think I expected it to be more affecting, given the subject matter. So I rated this 3.5 stars. It's a good book, but I think the way it was written, the protagonist's voice was quite detached from what was going on, and it also felt like just a series of things that happened, which is quite often what happens in life, frankly, but it didn't have a super satisfying ending. It just kind of felt like it stopped.
So very naturalistic.
Yes, this isn't a true story, but it is kind of based on the author going back to her home country. She's an American but of Lithuanian descent, and interviewing lots and lots of people. So there's lots of elements of truth in this. So yeah, I'd recommend it if that sounds like your kind of thing, but as a kind of, I wouldn't recommend it as a springboard into historical fiction or something like that.
Or, a light beachside read.
Yes, know what you're getting in for. But to be fair, the cover and the barbed wire, it does kind of sell itself for what it is.
Next up is Wonder by R.J. Palacio, which is a YA about a young boy who has been homeschooled his entire life due to some serious facial disfigurement. This is affecting, conversely. And while I enjoyed it and I was affected, it did feel almost clinical at times. The equivalent in music would be noticing when they stand up for the key change. It's very orchestrated and structured in the way that book isn't. This is very much structured for effect, and so you switch between POV characters, and the order of those is quite cleverly calculated to have the maximum impact. As a tool for building empathy, particularly in younger readers, I think it's really very well done. As a novel, it feels a little forced on occasion, but that doesn't take away from the impact. I mean, I still cried at the end, even though I knew that I'd been made to cry.
Next for me is Raven Stratagem by Yoon Lee, which is the second book in their Machineries of Empire series. I really enjoyed the first book in the series, Nine Fox Gambit. I think I rated it 4.5 stars, maybe? This one I didn't enjoy so much, but I still rated it around 4 stars, so I'm definitely continuing with the series. I'm partway through the third book now. But this just didn't get to me as much as the first one. Without going into any spoilers, I think one of the main reasons I didn't like this as much as the first book was that the point of views changed. In the first book, then, you follow a young officer who's just been promoted and given an impossible task. Not only has she got to save a fortress, but she's got to do so working very closely with a general who's been implanted in her head. Sort of the ghost of a general who has been put in that state because they are a mass murderer. But not just in the normal generaling way. This book doesn't follow those same characters. I'm not saying that they're not in it. The other thing was that the first book had a very strong sense to me of where it was going and what it was working to overall, whereas this book I wasn't really sure where it was going. I think probably this might be struggling from kind of middle book to me. I really like structure in my books. I like it when I read the blurb and I have a rough idea of what I'm expecting. I did really enjoy going back to this world, because that is one of the things I really like about this series. And in some ways it was easier to read because there was less new stuff getting thrown in. On the other hand, that can be kind of fun, so yeah.
My final book this month, and the only one I'd wholeheartedly recommend, though only if you've read Volume 1, is Monstress Volume 2, The Blood, by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda. The protagonist that we saw stumbling through the events of the first book seemingly has more purpose and agency in this book, which is quite nice to see. Her passenger also appears to be acquiring more agency and direction, which is interesting for all concerned.
I also read this month, which is why I get to say that I read more books. This for me was another 4.75 star read, which is ridiculous for me, so I liked it just as much as the first one. Getting to see more personality of the monster I really enjoyed, and just following this main character and her kind of cute sidekicks through the world and learning more about its kind of complex history was really fun.
We'll be sure to pick up Volume 3 in January if it doesn't appear in a stocking.
This has now gone slightly in the wrong order because I preferred Monstress Volume 2 to this book, but I still very much enjoyed it. This is The Boy on the Bridge by M.R. Carey, which I rated 4.25 stars, which is the same as I rated Girl with All the Gifts. This book is set in the same world as The Girl with All the Gifts, but follows a completely different set of characters. However, I would recommend that if you are interested in reading them, you read Girl with All the Gifts first, because even though this stands alone, I think it would maybe ruin some of the twists for the other book. So
diminish the impact of the other book.
Yes. I'm not going to give away any spoilers. This is kind of shelved in the kind of thriller horror-y section. The world is not what it is now, and this follows a team on a kind of truck of scientists and military personnel who are all in very close quarters trying to find out more about their world and what's happened. I really like that kind of setup. I think that's really fun. M.R. Carey, I realised through this, is very good at painting characters, or at least for me. I very much understood quite early on what all the characters were about, what their motives were, which is really quite fun for like a 400-page book. Actually having that really early on, feeling connected to those characters, made it seem quite a lot shorter. This is a thriller. It's pretty fast-paced. It was pretty good all round, really. The ending was very satisfying and not at all expected. Ties in nicely with the other book. I'd say the one downside, which didn't really affect me much, but I could recognise it, was that it's quite similar to Girl with All the Gifts in terms of the themes that it's exploring. There's a lot about found families, what it means to be human, what it's worth sacrificing for the future, which means that I think if you read them quite close together, they might seem a bit too similar. I didn't, but that meant I then felt like I might have been missing out on things by not remembering if things were linked. I wanted more Girl with All the Gifts, so this worked for me. If you didn't get to the end of that book saying, I want more, then this is kind of just more of that, so it might not be worth picking up. If you've read any of these books, then let us know down below.
Or if we've encouraged you not to pick them up.
Yeah, there might have been more ones we've encouraged people not to than encourage people, but you win some, you lose some.
Negative reviews are useful too. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon.